So, as I was making a model of the tabernacle, I realized something unique. The Bible describes how the Israelites were instructed to encamp around the tabernacle during their wanderings in the desert. Each of the 12 tribes had a specific location around the tabernacle. In my model, each tent represents 10 people. As I started to arrange all the tribes according to their number and I zoomed out, I saw something incredible. Can you see this? The camps form a cross. This made me think that it would be a good idea to create an episode that would talk about how the tabernacle corresponds to the Garden of Eden and the Messiah. But before we will do that, please remember to subscribe to the channel, give a like and press that bell button. This helps me a lot, so thank you for your willingness to support me in this way. With that out of the way, let's begin our new episode. Before I talk about how the tabernacle speaks about the Messiah, I want to show you a few examples where we can see how the tabernacle also reflects the reality at the beginning of creation. So here are just a few that I like to mention. The presence of God. Both the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle were seen as places where God's presence dwelt. In the garden, God walked and talked with Adam and Eve. We read about it in Genesis 3:8. The tabernacle was constructed as a dwelling place for God among the Israelites during their wilderness journey. Exodus 25:8. Sanctuary and holiness. Both the garden and the tabernacle are described in terms that connote sanctity and holiness. Eden is often seen as the first sanctuary where humans enjoyed fellowship with God. The tabernacle, likewise, was a sanctuary for the Israelites, a place of worship and sacrifice. The tree of life and lampstand. Some scholars see a connection between the tree of life in the Garden of Eden and the golden lampstand, menorah, in the tabernacle. The lampstand, with its branches and almond blossom design, may symbolize the tree of life. The cherubim. The cherubim are mentioned in relation to both Eden and the tabernacle. After Adam and Eve expulsion from the garden, cherubim were placed to guard the way to the tree of life. We read about it in Genesis 3:24. In the tabernacle, images of the cherubim were woven into the curtains, Exodus 26:1, and were also part of the Ark of the Covenant in the most holy place, Exodus 25:18-22. Access to God. After the fall, Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, signifying a broken relationship between God and humanity. The tabernacle, with its sacrificial system and priesthood, provided means for the Israelites to approach God, symbolizing the restoration of that relationship. The eastward orientation. Both the Garden of Eden and the tabernacle have an eastward orientation. Adam and Eve, after the sin, are driven out of the east of Eden, Genesis 3:24. Similarly, the entrance to the tabernacle court faced east, Numbers 3:38. These parallels suggest a theological narrative of loss and restoration, where Eden represents the original perfect relationship with God, and the tabernacle represents the beginning of a process to restore that relationship, culminating, in Christian belief, with the coming of the Messiah. Many Christians believe that the tabernacle, as described in the Old Testament, holds significant symbolism pointing towards Christ. This belief comes from the idea that the Old Testament was foreshadowing of the New Testament and Jesus Christ's life and sacrifice. Here are some examples that you may like. The tabernacle as a whole. The tabernacle was considered the dwelling place of God among his people. Exodus 25, verse 8. In a similar way, Jesus is believed to have been God's dwelling among his people, John 1:14. The sacrificial system. The sacrificial system in the tabernacle was designed to atone for the sins of the people, Leviticus 16. This foreshadows Jesus' sacrifice on the cross, which is believed to be the ultimate atonement for the sins of humanity, Hebrews 10:10. The high priest. The high priest served as the mediator between the people of God, making atonement for them. This can be seen as a type of Christ, who is described as the ultimate high priest, the mediator between God and humanity, Hebrews 4:14-15. The Holy of Holiness. This inner part of the tabernacle, where God's presence dwelt, was separated by a veil and could only be entered once a year by the high priest to make atonement for the sins of the people. In the New Testament, when Jesus died, the veil of the temple, the later version of the tabernacle, was torn in two, symbolizing that the barrier between God and humanity was removed through Christ. Matthew 27:51. The Ark of the Covenant. Within the Holy of Holies, the Ark contained the tablets of the law, a jar of manna, and Aaron's rod. These symbolize aspects of Christ as the fulfillment of the law, Matthew 5:17, the bread of life, John 6:35, and our high priest, Hebrews 4:14-15. The showbread. This bread, also known as the bread of presence, was always to be on the table in the tabernacle, Leviticus 24:5-9. Jesus referred to himself as the bread of life, John 6:35, which could be seen as a reference to this aspect of the tabernacle. The lampstand. The lampstand in the tabernacle provided light, which can be seen as a symbol of Jesus being the light of the world, John 8:12. Okay, so those are some examples where we can see the parallels between the tabernacle, the Garden of Eden, and Jesus' ministry. But what about the cross? Can a cross be found in the Old Testament? Well, the answer is yes. The cross can be found symbolically in the Old Testament, although it's not described in the same way as the cross of Christianity. One example of the cross in the Old Testament is the book of Numbers, where the Israelites were bitten by snakes and Moses made a bronze snake and put it on a pole or staff, and whoever looked at the bronze snake would be healed. This bronze snake on a pole has been interpreted by some as a precursor of the cross. The snake in this example would represent the sin of humanity, and only those that look and understand that the sin needs to be crucified will be healed and will be given life. Another example is in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 21, verse 23, where it says that anyone who is hung on a tree is under God's curse. This verse has been interpreted as a reference to crucifixion and foreshadowed the crucifixion of Jesus. We should also mention the example in the book of Exodus, chapter 17, verses 8-16. In this story, the Israelites were fighting against the Amalekites, and as long as Moses held up his hands with the staff of God, the Israelites would prevail. When Moses grew tired, Aaron and Hur held up his hands for him. The staff of God is often depicted as a symbol of the cross, and this story has been interpreted by some as foreshadowing of the victory of cross over sin and death. Another example is in the book of Psalms, particularly Psalm 22. This psalm is a prophetic description of the suffering of the Messiah and contains several references that could be interpreted as allusions to the cross, such as They have pierced my hands and feet, verse 16, and they have divided my garments among them and cast lots for my clothing, verse 18. These things of course happened to Jesus Christ as he was crucified in Jerusalem. Another example of this would be the suffering servant in Isaiah 53. When you read those verses, you can actually feel like you are reading the New Testament and you are reading about Jesus Christ who is suffering for the sins of people. Lastly, we can also see the cross in the arrangement of the camps on the desert. According to the book of Numbers, chapter 2, the 12 tribes of Israel were instructed to camp around the tabernacle in a specific formation. The tribe of Judah, which was the tribe from which the King David and ultimately Jesus would come, was to camp in the east, while the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph, were to camp in the west. The other tribes were to camp to the north and south. This arrangement has been interpreted by some as representing the cross. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed this episode and you were able to learn something new. I want to also thank everybody who is supporting the channel and helping me to create more of such content. If you think that my work is helpful to you, please consider supporting my channel. You can do that by clicking the Patreon icon on my main channel page. This will take you directly to the Patreon page where you can support the channel. If you can't find the icon, I will leave a link to the Patreon page in the description of this video. Thank you again, have a good day, and Shalom.